Okay. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Ed, for being here. I'm doing the NASC Origin Interview of Constellations in North America pre-2005. When did you first learn about constellations?
I learned about constellations in 1998. I found out about them at a Gestalt conference in Montreal. There was a listing of Gestalt and art Gestalt and dance Gestalt and this and that and the other thing. And at the bottom, there was this thing that said family constellations. So I said, well, maybe I should check that out because I've been checking out a lot of the Gestalt. And I went to the family constellation and had a great time, a great experience. So I pursued it from that point.
That sounds good. I'm very familiar with Gestalt as well. And that's kind of how I came to constellations as well. So glad you found it. Yes.
Yeah.
What drew you personally into the world of work and made it a passion for you moving forward from the Gestalt work?
Well, the person that was doing the constellations in Montreal, it was so exciting for me. I said to him, where can I learn this? And he said, there's another workshop or a full workshop going on down in Vermont. And I thought, Vermont, of all places, Vermont's not so into advancement like the therapies and the studies that we are. And so anyway, I went down there and I went to a workshop, and it completely changed my relationships with my parents. I had been negative towards my parents most of my life, and I had this experience where the constellation was set up where the four siblings were looking at each other in a circle, and then my mother and father were on the outside of the circle looking away, and the facilitator came, asked questions, and everybody said the kids said they were okay. I went to my mother and said, what's going on with you? And she said, I don't know, something's going on over there. I don't know what it is, something in front of me. I went to my father and said the same thing, something in front of me. And so she came back to me and said, where were your parents born? I said, Ireland. So she went back and she picked somebody for Ireland, and my mother and father, the representatives, collapsed. It was just amazing. And I was so in touch with the feelings about how much they had given, and all they could give was what they gave. And it was enough. So I felt liberated and changed and felt love for them in the first time in a long time. So it was beautiful. That's kind of how I get into it more deeply. Then I went down to New York, and there was a training program. Bert Hellinger really coming to New York, and he brought some other people with him: Hunter Beaumont, Jakob Schneider, Stefan Hausner, and Gunther Weber, and I don't know who else, but they were the cream of the crop. And so I spent a year studying with them. And then I did a second year as a co-trainer with Susie Tucker. So that's kind of how I got into it all.
That's a very powerful experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very changing your life in the instant.
Yes. Thank you. Who were your systemic constellation teachers and colleagues?
The teachers were Hellinger, Hunter Beaumont, Gunther Weber, Stefan Hausner, Jakob Schneider, and several others that I just don't recall right this minute. And my colleagues are Bill Mantle and Susie Tucker and David Slater and several other people from around the country. I chat with them every now and then to kind of get updated and find out what new stuff they're doing, and I tell them what new stuff I'm doing. So it's fun to have the colleagues to talk with, and we give each other a little bit of a hard time, like whether we're doing the constellations phenomenologically or whether we're doing them psychodynamically. And I find a lot of people are doing them psychodynamically and not phenomenologically. And I go crazy about that.
It sounds like a lot of fun too.
Yes, yeah, it really is. Really is.
Great. What participation did you have in the early history pre-2005 of constellations in North America?
Well, I had gone to Germany every year for 10 years, and I started a program. Well, actually, the first constellation I did when I came back home, I said, well, I think I can do this. I studied it for a year and felt that with my background in Gestalt and several other approaches to psychotherapy, that I could do it. So I sent out a mailing to about 25 people, and 12 people responded. And they came, and this was like in 2001. They came, and we had a wonderful day. I was right on with all the work, and they were quite impressed. So they asked me if I would do a training program. So then I thought, well, I might try that. So I tried a training program, and that lasted for 10 years. And then I did a North American Constellations Conference for 11, 12 years, and I had some of the Germans come over and work with me on the conference or on the workshop, the intensive, and it was very useful and important, and people loved it. And the work was amazing, and I continued on from there. Just did more workshops, and I got invited to go to Spain and Italy and France and Germany and a couple of other places that got me involved. It was more foreign than domestic. Although I did do some stuff in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New York, Pennsylvania. Did like a day-long workshop or a weekend workshop. So it was my involvement in the early years. I essentially brought the constellations to Connecticut and to the East Coast. Brought it from Germany to here, and it became successful, very successful.
Yeah, sounds like it. So you mentioned 2001. Is that when you started facilitating?
I think that was it. Yes, I think that was the year.
Yeah. Okay. And so you have trained students?
Yes,
Okay.
trained many students.
Okay. What were your main points you try to teach your students?
The main points were that it was systemic phenomenological work, and that it wasn't analytic psychodynamic work that they were so much more familiar with. That to watch and to listen and to pay attention to the phenomena as they occur in the field and in the system was the important thing. And then the orders of love, I wanted them to be united with the orders of love in their work, so that they would kind of follow along what Hellier had created. So it was very interesting, and a lot of the students went on to do little training workshops around Connecticut and different places, and they seemed to learn a lot and enjoyed it, and became constellators themselves. They took away all my clients.
I'm sure you had more to come, right?
More to come.
Yes. What are your gems of wisdom from your work with constellation?
Well, that's a tough question. Gems of wisdom. Gems of wisdom are phrases and things that emerge from while I'm in the process of doing the work, and I don't tend to remember them very much beyond that point. But they would be tied into orders of love, and the the dynamics between parents and children, and between siblings, and between former partners. I would say things that were perceived as being pretty sharp, pretty wise, but I don't recall any right now.
It was all important, right? When it comes up, and then
Right.
it's right in the moment. That's
Yeah.
right. Good.
Yeah.
Any variations that you prefer personally?
Well, I developed a triad constellation, which is very interesting. It's very intense. The triangle is, or the triad is the strongest support for buildings in huge buildings. They rely on the triangle to make it sturdy and wind effective, and so it won't blow down. So I realized there must be some power in the triangle, and I asked one of the former students if she would work with me in the triangle, and we had some volunteers. We had the third person in the triangle, and what happened was that we would be made, the two therapists would be made into mother and father, or sister and brother, or employee employer, or something from the client's life, and then we would give back to the client whatever he gave to us, and then in terms of sensations, feelings, thoughts, we give it back to the client, and then the client would be kind of filled with what he said and what we gave back to him, and then we'd ask him we switch into therapist and ask him how he felt, and then there'd be some therapy work, and then we may appear as the stereotypical idealized perfect mother, perfect father, and then we would do the work. We'd create an experiment that was useful in terms of getting to something positive, and we would move from that point towards the end. So it's been really powerful, and it really has helped a lot of people. It's very deep because we don't use representatives. The two therapists, two facilitators become the representatives. So we keep all the energy in the center of the triangle, and it's just intense, and it goes very deep. And I've always kind of liked the deeper stuff rather than the surface stuff. So that's one thing that I think was pretty important.
Thank you. I agree. I tend to work into the deep very fast as well. It's very important because that's where the roots are
Yeah.
usually. So thank you. How do you see constellations evolving in the future?
Well, I think the constellations have become, originally, Bert Hellinger said they should have only one a year. In fact, only one your lifetime, because if it's straight out the orders of love, then you were finished. But then he said maybe once a year. And now it's like some people treat it like a individual therapy or a group therapy, and go like once every week or 2 weeks. So that's a little bit different. I'm drifting here.
That's okay.
Lost my thought. So it's done more recently. It's developing in a way away from the original work. As I said earlier, the original work was very phenomenological, very awareness, very existential, very here and now. And it's moving now a little bit into, as all the therapies do, they move and grow, and people add things. It's moved up more into the having people work every time.
Mhm.
And the issues they're presenting are not the ones that were listed as under the under the original list of things. There was, whether you had somebody excluded or somebody it was out of order in terms of give and take, or somebody who was out of order in terms of seniority. So there'd be sort of the set kind of things to work with. And now it's, you can work with anything. You can say, I'm having trouble with my boss, and you can set up a constellation. But I think what happens in setting up the constellation in that way, you lose the field and the power of the phenomena. And so now it's constellations and music constellations and art constellations and other things, which have brought some perspectives in. But I think we're getting too far away from the roots of it, where the real power in healing is.
Yeah, thank you for the insight. That's great. So before we close, is there anything else you would like to add? Anything else you would like to point out?
Well, I think the future of constellations is to grow more. It's kind of coming back now after the pandemic.
Mhm.
I see more things on Facebook and more things. I'm receiving more flyers and emails about it. So that it's the future is good for it. But I think it's almost getting to the point now where it's one of the therapies or
Mhm.
it's one of the traditions. Like Gestalt is not so crazy as it once was. It's sort of one of the therapies. I think family constellations is coming to be one of the therapies.
Yeah.
But it's if you go to a conference, if you go to a Gestalt conference or a family constellation conference or seminar, you'd be lucky to find somebody under 50. So a lot of young people are maybe curious about it, but they don't seem to be coming into the training programs. Mostly it's older guys and gals that are interested in it. And so I don't know how it'll go on. It'll go on, but it'll have different qualities. It'll probably be more technological.
It's always changing, isn't it? Just like the
Yeah.
world. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ed. I really appreciate your insight and your wisdom, and I will share it with the group, and we're going to have lots of support from there to share your message and your life. So
Well,
thank you so much.
and thank you for doing this kind of a thing. It's not an easy project, but it's really well done in terms of needing to be done, and people need to
Yes,
hear about it. Great.
we agree too. Yes.